Welcome to this very special edition of The Author's Voice with KAJ, a show where we explore the stories behind the stories. Here we dive into the worlds created by authors, discover their inspirations, and ensure that you walk away enriched and inspired. And today we have with us author Heather Ann Ferri. She is also a speaker, healer, and educator. She is the author of Victim to Victory, that was in 2018. And now the latest is Transcending Victim to Goddess, a groundbreaking series that redefines resilience and empowerment. So we'll talk about that, this particular book, Transcending Victim to Goddess. So let's dive into the story behind the story. Welcome to the show, Heather.
Oh, thank you so much. Many blessings.
You're welcome. Welcome back to the show, this time on the Author's Voice with KAJ. So, Heather, first to understand, we'll talk about the book, but first, let's talk about the author. You have written several books. How is it, what made you become an author? What inspired you to become an author? Let's understand that part of your journey.
What inspired me was sickness. I never planned on writing books. And about 15 years ago, I got very, very sick and really lost my ability to walk. And it was through that time that whatever you believe, for me, God, the Divine Mother was calling and said, grab that notebook and pen and just start writing. And that's something that I could do. And I was surprised, having been in the theater arts, as you know, and had done Broadway, the creative arts, I'd never thought about writing things that, I wasn't necessarily comfortable talking about at the time. But there was a healing in that. It was the first, way of getting words on paper and then looking at those words and then trying to ask myself questions and figure out more of the discovery of, who was that inner child before child abuse? Who was that little girl before all this stuff started to happen? And how do I get back to her? And I really think that especially this book we're going to talk about today is really leading me back to the pure, authentic self that I am. And you hear those words and they're fancy words, you know what I mean? But there's something to be said about when you wake up, you have this inner joy. And it's all about that inner joy. So yeah, it's just a little bit. So I didn't plan on being a writer, but here I am.
Absolutely. Here you are. And then several books. And this is what? Book number 2? It's in a form of a series?
Yeah, this is the first book of 4 parts. And 3 are actually already done. The first one is out on Amazon. And then the book that I wrote in 2018, that's when I was sick. So that's like the awakening. And it's really an inspiration for those who are out there, because when something happens to you that's hard in life, whether you're sick or there's a crisis, sometimes Spirit, God has something in store for you if you can just take some time out and be silent and figure out what that is. And that, for me, that's writing, storytelling. I love storytelling.
Absolutely. So let's talk about this latest book of yours. It's there on the screen, Transcending Victim to Goddess. So yeah, help us understand. Means in both the books, this victim word comes in. Tell us the story about why this victim word comes into your story. What's the meaning, and how should one understand this particular book in that whole, understanding background?
So for me, I'm 53 years old, but it wasn't until I was 39 years old and I was really sick, like I spoke about, that I even considered the fact that I might be a victim. It never really even occurred to me. I've always been resilient, and I've always tried to look at the better parts of life, the better parts of people. I've always just tried to show up for myself. But through this sickness, I really believe sickness can be a huge spiritual awakening and calling for people to just go inside themselves. I realized, no, I am a victim. And so that started that journey. But this book, Victim to Goddess, is much deeper. There's much mystical and spiritualness to it. We're spiritual beings in a physical body. And for me, this was sort of the wake-up call of like, no, I'm a healer. And there are things that happen in life from the unknown that I want people to start to see the inspiration and hardships and things that don't make sense. And so when children are beaten or sexually abused, they're victims. They're not able to empower themselves and fight back or leave home a lot of times, and they're just stuck with all that trauma and all that shame and all those emotions. And part of this is it's a memoir, but it's also a manual, and it has self-love chapters after each chapter where we go into meditations and we go into questions and we go into breath work and psychology, things that helped me unravel and heal all the health issues that I had. And so, yes, I am not, I think a lot of times in the mainstream media in the last 5 years, we've used the word victim so much that we forget what the word actually means. And we need to spend some time, to just understand it, because you can't heal something you're not recognizing.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, what's within the book? Means you said it's like a memoir, and when it's a memoir, how do you also make it useful for others also, so that they can learn for things about things in their own way? Help us understand. That's why I asked what's within the book.
Yeah, I think I'll speak a little bit. So there's 8 chapters. The first chapter is my birth tribe, and it's the root, it's the root chakra. It's the story within you. And, I go through my story, which is, interesting in some ways and tragic in other ways. But after that chapter, I go into the breath work right away. That's the foundation. Like whenever you're going through a crisis, it doesn't matter what it is, we as healers teach you to sit and breathe and to understand what the breath is telling you. And then chapter 2, I call it my past life tribe. You may never discovered past lives or think about past lives, but I talk about the tap masters in New York City and how mystical and magical that was. And was it a coincidence that I lived above a jazz club, or was it divinely guided? Those types of things where you start to ask, and then I ask questions. Third chapter is India Kundalini, how I go to an ashram, study Kundalini yoga, start to awaken to my intuitiveness, my psychic abilities, start to understand that not everybody seems what they show on screen, these false masks, false personas, and you get to write about that. Are you really aware of who you are and the people around you? If you want better communication or better relationships, can you see them? How are you communicating? So there's lots of questions. My 4th chapter, which I think you would love, is my trip to India. I tell through the story how I'm in New York City during 9/11. I watched Tower 2 go down. And like anybody in New York City, we're going, what just happened here? This is a trauma. And I wake up every morning as I'm meditating every day saying, you're going to work in India. And I talk about my trip to India and the lessons I learned working on a television set with the cast and my connection to them. And I will share this because, I know you have an India audience. There's one section in that chapter that there's an English barrier between one of the dancers. She's not able to understand English or speak it. So we have to communicate through dance, through our body language. And at the end of this 6-week job with the Billy Graham Association, we were in a room, and I went up to each cast member and held both hands and looked them in the eyes and said, it was such an honor to work with you. And as I went around the circle, this particular dancer chose to learn the words, I love you. And that was a healing in my heart. And I talk about the differences of working in theater and television in India and the differences in America, the ego, and how my masks start to come off in India. And this is a representation of your workplace. Are you happy in your workplace? What's going on in your workplace? Does it represent your gifts? My 5th chapter is, generational bloodline patterns. We all have them, and sometimes you're like, why does this pattern keep showing up? And I just start to break down mine, and I start to break linear timelines. And this is could be confusing to some people and really interesting to other people, depending on how you are. But the purpose of starting to break timelines is when I work as a trauma coach privately, it's never just about that moment. We're talking about what happened in the past, and we're talking about how it's going to affect the future. And so we have different timelines affecting us all at once. And then if you remember bloodline, generational, some of your ancestors' stuff in your body or past lives. Chapter 6, born to teach, never planned on really doing teaching. God throws me into all these interesting situations, and I use my intuition to solve issues. And this inspires somebody in any workforce to start doing medical meditations and knowing how you can use your intuition to help whatever job you're doing. In fact, they're the first woman in Pittsburgh who was a police officer, then became detective, told me, this was about 10 years ago, how she was a psychic. And she never really told her male, colleagues, but she utilized that skill in being able to be one of the best. And so we're going to hear more and more of those stories now as time goes on. Chapter 7 is saying goodbye. It's about my grandmother dying. It's about her death and those issues and how we grieve. How do you grieve? Do you suppress it? Do you face it? Is there a process? Do you have a ritual? And chapter 8 is the Japanese energy healer. It's how I began becoming a healer. And book 2 will start to really dive into what the Divine Mother sets me up for. So yeah, these are interesting stories, and people really love storytelling, but it also, when I was in the coaching 8 hours a day, 10 hours a day with clients, what I found is that they're so focused on everybody else that when they actually start writing and start to look at their life, they start to see the magic in some of it. Like, oh, I overcame that, or oh, I did that. And we start to build their own stories. So I'm a huge believer in writing. And that's why I wanted the manual with sort of memoir stories.
Absolutely, absolutely, Heather. So there are so many things, good things in the book, and perhaps not so good things that you went through. But I want to understand, who is this book for?
Who is this book for? This book is for somebody that wants to spend more time with themselves. This book is somebody that life gets really, really busy, or you feel lost after a death, or things, maybe you keep getting sicknesses you don't understand, relationships. This is somebody that wants to go deeper into not just themselves analytically, but within their soul. This book is also for organizations. I've worked so much with the medical industry that I wanted to have a book, a tool that I could go in and help the practitioners. When I worked in senior homes for 8 years, I was at the end of that particular career trying to get programs for the nurses and the aides, because when our caregivers spend so much time with everybody else, they tend to neglect themselves. They absorb all of that pain or sickness all day long. And then if they have their own traumas, which a lot of them do, like myself, and they're not spending any time with that, that's when that disease starts to form within themselves. So yeah, this is for organizations, nonprofits, to have me come in and speak about trauma, but then to implement one of these chapters and to go deeper into the medical meditations or that. But for me too, there's a magic in this. I want to stay out of the Divine Mother's way, because when I wrote book 1, I didn't promote it, and I just let it sit there, and people found it all over the world. Not a lot, but the people who were supposed to hire me as a private trauma coach. And so I was led to start this series in a very ancestral, spiritual way. And she may have a path that I'm not even aware of yet. And that is the magic of life. I think when people hold the book, they're feeling the feeling of somebody who's been an ancient healer. We know there's an activation when you hold a crystal or when you hold something that a necklace that somebody loved you. Well, I love this book way more than the first book. This book I love because it's a part of my heart. It's a part of my passion. And it's a part of that declaration of that little girl that wasn't seen and heard. And if people have that inside of them, which I think a lot of men and women do, because I've sat across from them, they might be afraid, but maybe it's just sitting and holding the book and starting with chapter 1 and getting that pen out and seeing, turning off the devices for a little bit and seeing what happens.
Absolutely, absolutely, Heather. So when you write such a book, how do you balance authenticity with market expectations?
Hmm. Hmm. Well, I think when you read the book, especially the sections like when I talk about India, I didn't apply to get that job in India to go for 6 weeks and work on a television set. I was in meditation and I was living an authentic, being as true to myself as possible. And in those meditations, because I am doing a spiritual practice, however way you want to define that, I was being prepared for that job. And it was a great job. So when you talk about marketing products, marketing a book, I'm not an expert. I'm just following the Divine Mother and I'm following my heart. I think we're living in a time period where we are a little challenged because we're getting so involved in robotics and we're missing out so much in soul. So I'm a New Yorker at heart and an artist. Some of the best times weren't just on Broadway. They were in that little coffee shop where you heard that singer and she belted that song and your body just start to go, you woke up. That's what this is about. It's about art again. And so part of the marketing is being blessed to be on this podcast today and be able to share it through those realms. I think that's a new paradigm. And yeah. So I don't know if that makes sense, but that's my answer.
It makes sense. It makes sense. Everything makes sense. And this part, I truly understand it. So from that point of view, let me ask, what was the most uh, challenging part of writing this book?
I think just the most challenging part was getting started, because I had already written the part 2, believe it or not. And I heard from my father on the other side, who passed away, that said, no, we can't give them part 2. We need to rewrite part 1 very specifically. So on the back cover, I talk about my father and a little bit about his message. And so it was just getting started, again, and going through these chapters that feel like many lifetimes ago, to be honest with you. But when I went back and I started to really dive in them in a different way, I brought a lot more different stories. I took off a lot more masks. And it just, once I got to about chapter 3, it was really fun and creative. And you have to have that. You have to enjoy something you're selling. You have to really have a connection to it. And so, yeah, it was hard. And I think for a lot of people, like your analytical mind, because we are a very analytical society, especially in the United States, we are, every day robot, this is what we do. I have nothing against AI, but I'm concerned that people are going to lose their stories. I'm concerned that people are going to lose themselves. And that's what I think the magic of this book is. And so the challenge is to decide that you love yourself enough to sit in silence for a little bit and really share who you are. And I love to hear people's memoirs and stories. I'm fascinated by that and the choices they make and the decisions they make. And it makes you think about your own life. And so as an artist, I feel like that's what I bring to the table.
Absolutely. So, in a nutshell, what key message, key insight that you want readers of this book to take away with them?
What key message is that your inner child matters? And that may seem like a foreign concept to some people, but if you do healing work, if you are constantly working on yourself, the inner child, a lot of times in American schools, if you're not a all A student and you're great at mathematics, then you're what? Like we dismiss so many aspects of intuition, creativity, telepathic abilities, empath, new business concepts, because we're so programmed in a system that says if you're not this, then you don't fit in. And I think it is about when, sitting across from CEOs and doctors, and, they have all the degrees in the world and they're unhappy because their inner child wasn't heard, wasn't seen, wasn't able to express themselves, whether that's through dance, music, art, whatever. We have to incorporate these back in as value. There's value to them. And that's why I love this podcast, because you value books. You value the art of buying books, and you value the art of actually picking up a book, holding it, feeling it, and reading it. If we lose that intimacy, which it is an intimacy, there's nothing like better than curling up at night with a good book, right? We're losing parts of our soul. And so for me, I'm so proud to bring this, as well as the series coming, to the table to inspire people. Sit at the table with your friends, read, pick a chapter, read it, go through the questions as a group, be creative, start to interact with conversation at a coffee shop. These things are important in our society, because I don't have to tell you, a lot of people are kind of stuck in staring at screens all day and all night. And you can really lose a sense of not only yourself, but the sense of the people around you.
Absolutely, absolutely. So this is second book series. What's going to happen after this book? Any particular, update on what's going to come next? Anything else that you are doing you want the world to know about, Heather?
Well, I'm always available for private coaching, but the biggest thing is, if any organization or nonprofit wants to bring me in, hire me as a speaker, hire me as a facilitator, we can share one of the chapters that really, bridges some of the work that they want to do with their practitioners or their employees. This is sort of the bridge for me to you. And so I just send that out there to whoever's listening to this, and to also share it, to share the message of, I know somebody that's suffering right now, they're lost. Oh, this would be a great gift for them as well. So that's sort of what's on, and obviously book 2 is coming out next year real soon.
Absolutely, absolutely. When that comes out, we will certainly do talk about that too. There's so much to learn about all this from you, and I'm sure a lot of people would want to learn more about you, about your books, especially this particular book. So, what's the best way for them to connect with you, to get hold of this particular book, and also know about your other books?
Well, the best way is to go onto my website at heatherannferri.com, which also has, a contact, but my email, youmatter108@gmail.com. This book is available on Amazon right now. And I have a YouTube channel that I just switched to my name, Heather Ann Ferri, where I'm starting to talk about diving into certain subject matters that I'm very passionate about. So if you're interested in learning just more about who I am behind the book scenes, that's somewhere where you can follow.
Wonderful. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of The Author's Voice with KAJ. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.